Hello and welcome to another Uplift session. We are absolutely inspired to be beaming here live from quite chilly but crystal clear morning in Byron Bay across the Pacific to dear brother, Deep Wisdom Council member, and one of our powerful modern bridges between the worlds of science and spirit, Dr. Bruce Lipton. Good morning, good afternoon, Bruce.
Chip, so wonderful to see you and so wonderful to be here with this group because we're in a evolutionary movement that's so exciting. So any opportunity to talk about the new world and the new sciences is always looked for by me. Thank you.
Right on. It is an honor to have you here, and we're kicking off these live and recorded sessions, and it's a delight to have you part of this sort of pathfinding way. So, Bruce, one of the big themes that's emerging for the Uplift community and the Uplift movement in a variety of different ways at the moment is this notion that it's time to tell a new story, that it's time to live and create, but then that the stories that we tell and share in the world impact the way we experience it. And as we crack this theme open for the year for us, I thought who better to talk to but someone who understands the power of story and how it influences the biology of our very bodies. So thanks for joining us for the call.
I'm so happy to be here because this story changing story that we're working on is so totally important for a very significant reason, and that is this. Science has recognized that we are now deep into the sixth mass extinction of life, and what we see all around us is the web of life is starting to collapse. And five previous mass extinctions have been attributed to things like comets or asteroids hitting the planet and destroying the environment, people, and all that. But today's sixth mass extinction is actually due to human behavior. So it's the way that we believe about who we are, what we are, and how we fit into the world. The stories that we create about these topics shape our behavior. And then it turns out that science says is that the behavior that we're expressing right now is so destructive that we're facing our own extinction. So it's really the most important understanding. It's the story that is creating the world, and by necessity, we have to change the story. And it's also very exciting because people are beginning to realize that even if they haven't had any formal education in this field of evolution, that the world is going through an upheaval right now. They experience it. It's in the pit of their gut. It's something called the biological imperative. There's something in biology for every organism that when it's threatened, it will respond. Even if it doesn't know what the threat is, it will experience the concept of a threat. Now, biologists don't know where in the system this mechanism lies, but it's very simple. Any organism that is facing a threat will do every maneuver possible to stay alive. Well, here we are facing our own extinction, which I think is a great threat. And interestingly, even if you're not in the biology or the science, even if you're just in some middle of a community in the middle of some nation, you can experience that something is up, something is changing. You can feel it in the pit of your gut, that nothing is right. There's a vibration that's out. We're out of harmony. All of this is just a sign that people are on the edge of being prepared to make a change in their world and in their lives. So that, without trying to convince people that this is happening, they're already experiencing that something is afoot right here. And what we have to recognize is that the nature of our behavior has undermined our ecological web of life, that we're losing species of organisms faster now than in the five previous mass extinctions. In a sense that since 1950, we've lost about 90% of the fish in the ocean. The big fish are essentially gone.
Wow.
And that's us. We're doing all that. So it basically says, look, you cannot continue the way we're living. I say, yeah, but the way we're living is based on a belief system. We were all programmed as children about how the world works and how to relate to each other and how to relate to the world around us. And we've been using these beliefs to guide our lives. So, for example, a fundamental belief that shapes the world in which we live is the belief in a Darwinian theory of evolution. And the significance of that, that's a story that says, how did we get here? Because if we understand how we got here, then we can really work with our own evolution. if we know the mechanism of it. So in our Darwinian theory, what we know, it's been capsulized as life is a struggle for survival with a competition for fitness. And so basically, the basic story that we present about life from a scientific point of view is that life is a struggle and that there's this competition to survive. And this is now built into our story of we live. So even my father, who didn't go to school, knew that it was like a dog eat dog world, that he had to go out there, and if he didn't go out and eat, that he would just be run over by everybody else. So basically, what we're trying to understand here is that this story, which is not just in schools, it's just a cultural belief, is a story that says that life is a struggle and that you can't trust the other people because everyone is out for their own personal survival. So we compete with one another. The interesting aspect about this is that this is so completely off the nature of evolution. Evolution is reflected in what we call the Garden of Eden. That's that beautiful picture of life thriving on this planet. And what's most important is to recognize that a garden is not a battleground. It's not a competitive zone. A garden is a place where all the organisms are working in harmony, working together to create the balance that reflects the beauty of the garden. Well,
Now, Bruce, can I ask you a quick question about that?
yeah,
Sorry to interrupt. It's like,
go
wow, it's
right
like
ahead.
I love the way the river flows out of the source of Bruce Lipton. Just a quick question, as I was thinking about that, and the way things like the Darwinian theory are perpetuated. When I think about as a storyteller, what's interesting is, we think of story oftentimes in this day and age that we tell story based on what's happened. So we see something happen and then we make up our story about it. But what I love to think about is that a lot of our ancient cultures used story a bit more creatively. That they actually told stories based on what they wanted to happen. That the interpretations that they made were a bit more empowering. We're actually to weave into the fabric of reality new possibilities. And what I hear you saying a little bit is that we're kind of trapped in a story that's perpetuating itself. We're saying, look, that's how it is, and then we're continuing and building that story bigger and bigger. And how do we interrupt that?
Well, we have to understand the difference between the ancient cultures and today's cultures is that ancient cultures saw themselves as part of an entire system, that they were not separate from their world, that they were an integral element of the garden themselves. So when they were talking about the garden, they were talking about themselves as well as everything else. Today, in our world, we see ourselves as independent or individual elements in a garden, but not the garden. So when we see ourselves as separate from the garden, and we look at the garden and we don't realize, no, we are the garden. The difference is this: if you are the garden, then like in a garden, then you're cooperative and working with all the other organisms and species in the world around you and creating a life. You are creating a life. Today's concept of our genetics and our Darwinian theory really just says, look, we're just genetic automatons, and that we're out here having this life, and that we're separate from the environment. And it's interesting because we were first separated from the environment by Judeo-Christian philosophy that said there was a garden, and then people were added to the garden. So that meant, okay, there was this biosphere, and then we are separate because we came in separate from the biosphere. So the fundamentalist religious belief says, no, there's a garden, and we are the dominant master of the garden. We're the ones that control the garden. And then science comes along and tells a different story, but it has the same consequence, because science comes along and says, okay, no, you evolved from this garden, but it came through a whole series of random mutations, accidents. And as a result, then you say, well, why am I here? And if you understand it from a scientific point of view, I say, well, there's no reason I can give you. It's just a consequence of billion years of accidents with genetics, and that's why you're here. So you're not really relevant to being here. You're just a consequence of random mutation. So you're not connected.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because both the religious philosophy and the current scientific philosophy separate us from any connectedness to the garden, which the ancient people, they were the garden. They never saw themselves as separate from it. So when they created a life and a belief. They created it within the garden, and they were in that garden itself. We look at it and we say, there's a garden and it's not working right, let's fix it. And then we start to manipulate this garden without recognizing we're manipulating ourselves.
Yeah.
And this is what now comes down to the scientific reality. By manipulating the garden with our technology and with our greed, and with our loss of understanding of harmony and balance, which is a garden phenomenon. A garden is harmony and balance. We are completely out of harmony and completely out of balance because we've been programmed with the belief that, well, there's a garden out there and we can do what we want because we're here to dominate that garden. And so when you separate yourself from the outside, then you don't see that your impact had any influence on the fate of the garden, which is now coming right in our face. It says, my God, our human impact is what is causing the collapse of the garden. So we have to wake up right now and say that belief that you're on the outside and that you can manipulate this garden is a story that has really led to the problems that we're facing today. So it basically says, let's rewrite the story that we didn't get here by accident. We got here because of adaptation. Every organism in the biosphere didn't get here separate from every other organism. It got here to be in balance and harmony with all the other organisms. So when you take an organism like a human, you say, no, we're not connected to all that stuff and we can do whatever we want. We don't realize that we're part of a chain and that when we cut the links out from underneath us, we are disconnecting ourselves from the environment and the biosphere, and as a consequence, we're no longer sustainable. And so it says we got to change the story. And right now, and that's the interesting part about this. This isn't like, oh my God, evolution happens over millions and millions of years. I go, no, evolution is happening within decades, within
Wow.
decades. And we have to come to this. I mean, NASA just had a very interesting scientific report, a major report on industrialized civilization. It says it only has a few decades left. Now, a few is more than one, but probably only two or three at the most. So we're talking the collapse of civilization is already seen in the scientific world because we push the limit of sustainability beyond anything we can do. You know, the old story says if we keep living the way we're living, we need two or three more Earths to provide all the materials that we're using. It's like, well, okay, there's one Earth and there's nothing else. And it's kind of funny because some fundamentalist religious people are of the belief, oh yeah, once we destroy this environment, their story is once the environment's destroyed, they get catapulted out to another place. The rapture will take them away and bring them into a new garden. And that is like, oh my God, that's a story that is so worse than the one we're working with because they're encouraging the collapse because they want to go to the new garden. And to me, it's like, as just trying to be logical about this, is like, well, let's think about this. God gives you a beautiful garden, and then you destroy it, and then God rewards you by giving you a new beautiful garden that you can destroy. And I don't think that sounds logical.
So Bruce, here, so for people listening, and for myself as I'm standing here looking at and listening to my own garden, when we consider this, the possibility of this sixth mass extinction, it can feel so overwhelming, and we feel like, God, like, how can I make a difference? Like, this is too big. It's too big for me to have any impact to shift the currents or shift the tides. Bringing it back to the individual and our communities and our families, what do you see? What can we do to begin to genuinely recreate or genuinely tell a new story in our actions today that could have an impact, that can actually plant new seeds in this garden while there's wonderful soil there ready to receive it?
Well, it's real interesting you bring this up, Chip, because this is one of the reasons why you do not hear about this evolutionary paradigm change that we're coming into right now, that the environment is under this threat and all that, because the exact thing you just said, news people will not print articles when they realize that there's nothing that people can do about it. So don't talk about it is the way out of it, and this is why we don't really hear how profoundly close to the edge we are. Now and then you say, okay, does that mean then there's nothing we can do? And I go, absolutely not. That's not true. That what we're facing right now is something like a terminally ill patient. Excuse me, a terminally ill patient, and everyone says this person's going to die, and then they have a spontaneous remission,
Mm.
and all of a sudden they got no cancer, they got no disease, and the doctors and everybody looks around like nobody could figure this out. The underlying feature of a spontaneous remission is that the individual has a profound change of belief about their life.
Mm.
So, for example, a person terminally ill gets a diagnosis and a doctor says you have 3 months left to live. Well, there's two ways to respond to that. It's like, oh my God, 3 months, woe with me. Let me settle my affairs and I'll die in 3 months. Or some people say, I'm not putting up with that. I'm not buying that.
Mm.
And if I only have that little bit of time left, I'm just going to let go of all my problems and my job, and I'm going to go out on the road and spend my last few months and enjoy my life. And those are the ones that go out on the road, and then 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, they're still out on the road.
Mm.
And the reason is they let go of the old story of life and bought a new story of life, and the disease went away just virtually instantaneously.
Yeah.
And one of our community, of course, is Anita Morjani, and she went through 4 years of cancer and finally went into the last stage. Her oncologist told her family that that's it. She's in a final coma. She's done. That's it. And she had 4 years of cancer, and through her out of body experience, recognized that the story that she was living by was so conflicted with her life that that's where the problems came from. And when she came out of the coma with a clean slate, a new story, within 7 days, I think, or 5 days, 70% of the cancer was gone,
Mm.
and within 2 weeks, though all of the cancer was gone. Now, why is that relevant? The healing came about not because of anything physiological other than a change of belief about life.
Mm.
And why is this relevant? Is because Gaia, Earth, Mother Earth is a living system. And if we did a diagnosis, like a doctor would look at her and say, wow, Mother Earth's, nature is looking like it's facing a terminal event here. It's extinction, it's a terminal. And I go, yeah, absolutely true, if we don't change the story. So as fast as a spontaneous remission can happen in a human body, the Earth can express a spontaneous remission when enough people change the story.
Mm.
And say, well, how does enough people change the story? And then, as you said, what do I do as an individual? And the first thing is, I change my story, because every individual that changes the story is changing the vibrational environment in which we live, because your thoughts, which are creating this world, and that's an understanding from quantum physics that consciousness is really creating the world, that if we change this consciousness, we change the world. And so therefore, what we have to do is say, step out of the old story, because that's destructive. And you don't fight the old story. Don't try and, put your effort into moving the old story.
Mm.
Walk outside of the old story, build a new story. And the relevance is that people will leave the old story when they see a new story working.
Yeah.
And when we are creating an uplift experience, the experience of uplift is, we can change the story right now. We can have a spontaneous remission of the planet's ills. We can change the environment by just changing who we are. And this is manifesting right now. And it's unfortunate because good news like that doesn't really counter the bad news that they put in the media. Bad, this is, it's a
It's
human
about to.
characteristic. It's a human thing. If you're driving on the highway, there's an accident, everybody slows down for the morbid thing of looking at the accident.
Mm.
Well, today's media is like reporting accidents everywhere, and everybody, caught up in the media. It's like, no, listen, there are so many of us out there that are not part of that structure.
Yeah.
But nobody writes about it. And so the idea that I'm alone with this is like, well, this is wrong. There's lots of us out here. We're not necessarily communicating together, but then the mission of Uplift is to bring these different groups that are already living outside of the other story and bring them together, and recognizing there's a large number of us. And every time we add a new member, we empower the group, because the story is stronger. And the stronger the story, the more the reality changes with that. So every one of us says, look, you have a choice: get back in the system or step out of the system. You got two choices here. And stepping out of the system is freaky for a lot of people because their belief system is so integrated into the roots of the system that they feel like if I walk out of the system, I'm lost. And it's like, no, there's a much better thing going on outside the system, and that people are discovering this every day, that there's a better way of life.
Hmm.
And once you start to live it, guess what? You don't see doctors as much. Why? You're not as sick as you used to be. That around you, communities are much more loving and supporting. Why? Because if you're seeking that story, then you will find people that share the same story. If you're seeking love and harmony, guess what? You'll find people that represent love and harmony. And then all of a sudden, you're not alone in this game. How do you do it, though, as you brought up? Until you do the first step, there is no journey.
Hmm.
The first step is, when do I decide to let go of the story and start something new?
Hmm.
And this is really the moment of that decision. And again, just to let people know, it's not, you're not alone in this. There's large numbers of us that are already doing that, and it's changing the field. And so it's kind of funny because it looks like everything is rocky and shaky, and it is rocky and shaky. But this is profoundly important, and I need people to get this point. Science has already agreed that the way we're living on the planet is not sustainable, that we're facing our extinction because of our behavior. That's already an agreement. And so the simple reality is that we really have to move out of this old story. And to do that, that means that the structure that represents the old story is not sustainable for us to build a new story on. That's where the problem is. The foundation of the old story is so bad, you can't build a new building on top of it. So, by definition, you want to build a new building, the old story and the old foundation have to crumble.
Hmm.
And so this is what scares people, because they look at the crumbling thing and they go, "Oh my God, thy world is falling apart." And I'm going, "No, no, most positive sign possible." Why? Because we cannot replace it with a sustainable story until it's gone. And so as we go into these days where it looks more scary and more weird, there's two ways of looking at that. If you're part of the structure, I'd be afraid. But
Hmm.
if you're part of the new story, I'd be excited, because it says we're making way for something new to be created, a new foundation of life, because the existing one is not sustainable.
Hmm.
So we have to recognize that, well, it looks scary. And I go, yeah, it is scary because it doesn't work. You can step over here to the new story and live in this new story right now. And when you do that, you will appreciate that the falling apart of the old one is not a bad sign.
Hmm.
It's actually a sign that we're moving into a better, sustainable world. So we have to celebrate this rather than living in the fear that the media is trying to, grab us with the stories, the scary stories of things. And it's like, no, no, don't even touch the media. As a matter of fact, that's why what you're doing, Chip, and what Uplift is doing is saying, look, you got another source of information and media. You don't need that old one,
Yeah.
because that old one is trying to keep you in there through fear, and that will make you sick, and it makes the world sick.
Yeah. But we got an opportunity to build a whole new garden right here.
And we are, and that's the fun part about it, because when we like celebrated the Uplift experience, when all those people showed up the first time, and after 4 days of this festival, and they realized, my God, we're all living in this community with this new thought, and there's so much happiness and love and joy and community, that when it supposedly ended at 10 o'clock on Sunday night, it never ended because the people didn't want to go home. Why? They were in a new community, and that new community is really what we're looking to build right now.
Aho. Aho, brother.
All
Well,
right.
Bruce, we've got a, must be a news helicopter coming over to see what we're creating here in the garden. So that must be our sign to go. Wow, let this be the first of several connections that we'll have between now and Uplift 2014. It's so inspiring to hear from you, and it's as a storyteller, I think about these moments of climax in story, that where the heroes are challenged so deeply, and in retrospect, you always look back and you go, "Wow, that was their greatest gift." because it made them realize who they really were. And I see you as a great reminder of who we really are and why we're here. So you're a hero, Bruce. Thanks so much, and look forward to seeing you very soon.
Thanks, Chip. And I really want to thank all the listeners out there because I want them to recognize by participating in what we're discussing, they actually represent the cultural creatives, those people looking outside of the box for the answers that will take us into a thrivable future. And so they should be recognized that everyone listening is already thinking about what can I do to create that new world. And I appreciate them for being there because that is where the evolution comes from.
Oh, thanks, Bruce. Have a beautiful
Thank-
evening.
Thanks.